Good evening. Thank you for coming to Morell. I imagine some of you are basically from Morell. And after I got to the right school, everything went along fine. But at least half a dozen people followed me into the wrong school. And they're having some type of basketball game over there. As I said, welcome and thank you. This is the second of 14 publicly scheduled meetings across the province, the purpose of which is to get your input, your comments, your suggestions, your observations in respect to the review of the Lands Protection Act, which was passed by the legislature in May of 1982. There are several maps at the back that you can look at, and you can take copies of miniature maps there. They talk about non-resident ownership, they talk about corporate ownership, as well as we're going to pass out the terms of reference for the review that we're doing right now. This is Patrick Carroll, and he's assisting me in this process, and he's going to pass these out. And these are the actual terms of reference. And I'll just look at, maybe I'll just wait a moment until you receive the actual papers. We're going across the province, and next we're going to O'Leary if we don't get a nor'easter on Saturday. And then we're going to be going to North Rustico, and we're going to Wellington, and we're going to Crapple. It's a total of 7 in the first block, and then we're going to do another advertisement for another 7. I have been doing a little bit of speaking at the request of various organizations, and have spoken to the ADEPT Council. 100 people paid $10 to come and have breakfast the other week. And then I spoke a couple of weeks ago to the Federation of Agriculture, the annual meeting, and I received an invitation in the last 24 hours to speak at the National Farmers Union, and that's going to take place in early April at their annual meeting. So if we just want to look at the center of the page there, it says that the Executive Council wanted to have me examine and conduct research and consultations and make recommendations related to the Prince Edward Island Lands Protection Act. And one of the things they want report on it is the adequacy of existing aggregate land holding limits given changes in agriculture, provincial land use and ownership trends, and rural communities. 2, options for reducing red tape and regulatory requirements while ensuring that the Act can be effectively administered and enforced. 3, legislative concerns that have risen involving such issues as land holding limits as they apply to utilities, application thresholds as they apply to multiple owners, and the information and deeming requirements for non-profit corporations, and any other matter the Commissioner deems appropriate to review and bring to the attention of Executive Council. Now, when this statute was passed, it was the culmination of various other pieces of legislation over quite a long period of time. And I don't need to tell you about the absentee British landlords that became quite an issue around Confederation. And then basically there were laws passed that restricted the amount of acres that non-Canadians could own. And that was originally set at 200 acres without the approval of Executive Council. Then it got reduced in the early 60s to 10 acres. And then in the 70s, in the Campbell government, they made some of these applications apply to corporations. And then in the late 70s, when I was a member of the McLean government, there was quite a lot of public discussion on limits regards farming, corporations, whether they were also involved in processing and so forth. A legislative committee was established under the chairmanship of Gordon Lank. They held public hearings. They listened to representations from farm organizations and farmers and individuals who weren't farmers They brought a report into the legislature, and there were 18 recommendations, and the 18 recommendations were all adopted by the House, and then the legislation, for the first time, was put into a statute called the Prince Edward Island Lands Protection Act, and it stipulated 1,000 acres for any person, whether you were a resident of the province or not. And when it came to corporations, it provided a maximum of 3,000 acres, provided you had 3 equal shareholders, all equal voting rights. At that particular point in time, that was very different from what had happened before, because it was putting limits on existing residents of the province, individuals. And it also then carried over that figure of 1,000 per person, carried over to getting the 3 per corporation with equal shareholders. In 1998, the then government, and I was long back at that time practicing law, they made an amendment to the Lands Protection Act that is perhaps worthy of significant note, and that is they put into the statute a purpose section. What was the purpose behind the legislation? And they put it in, and I just want to read certain parts of it. It's very unusual to find in a statute the purpose. And the purpose of the Act is to provide for the regulation of property rights in Prince Edward Island, especially the amount of land that may be held by a person or corporation. This Act has been enacted in recognition that Prince Edward Island faces singular challenges with regard to property rights as a result of several circumstances, including A, historical difficulties with absentee landowners, and the consequent problems faced by the inhabitants of Prince Edward Island in governing their own affairs, both public and private. B, the province's small land area and comparatively high population density unique among the provinces of Canada. And C, the fragile nature of the province's ecology, environment, and lands, and the resultant need for the exercise of prudent, balanced, and steadfast stewardship to ensure the protection of the province's ecology, environment, and lands. There have been various amendments made to the legislation over that period of time, and I'm going to stop talking now and like you to make comments if you wish. Come right in, Ruben. Lots of seats in the front row. Just like church, lots of seats in the front row. If you come out to sit here, you'll be sitting beside 3 siblings. You'll be one of the 3. That's up to you. Up to you. And very much welcome your comments, observations. No comment is too big or too small. If you feel like you'd like to raise it, then please do so. If you feel comfortable coming to the mic, please do so. If you wish to sit down, please do so. And we'll see if we can have a nice evening of some conversation and some discussion and a chance to learn. And I could only learn if you're able to provide information that will provide insight into this whole matter. So it's always interesting how you get the first comment, but anyway, I'm more than welcome to see where we're going to go. The first comment here.
I will make a comment.
Terrence.
I was at the Federation of Agriculture annual general meeting.
Can you speak up a little bit? Maybe, can people in the back hear Terrence?
I was at the Federation of Agriculture AGM.
How'd you like to come up here?
Okay.
Maybe you want to.
Does this one work? Yeah.
Okay, that's fine.
There's a little low. There we go. And I'm in favor of increasing the land limits.
Yes.
And I would like to point out, you mentioned Gordon Lank,
Yes.
who chaired the committee.
Yes.
Now, Gordon is also in favor of a review and increasing the limits.
He told me I would hear from him at some meeting. I'm not sure what meeting.
Yeah, I was looking for him. I don't see him here.
It's not. Okay. Would you like to perhaps explain your observation, your thought a little bit, whether it relates to you generally in your situation or just observations about the community and what you see?
Well, you know, a lot of things have changed in the last 30 years, and I don't think I have to quote statistics to you. There's not a lot of farmers left, and farming is changing. I think you'll notice driving around the province now, you'd be hard-pressed to find a fence or a herd of cattle that aren't dairy. We're getting into more grains and oil seeds and things like that, and you know, 1,000 acres, hard job to pay for a modern combine if you're limited to 1,000 acres of grain. And even with the potatoes, equipment is so expensive, farmers need economies of scale. In my case, I'm a blueberry grower. My concerns are more environmental than the need of acres. But I might talk about that a little later.
Okay, when we have a quiet spot in the evening, I'm going to make note of your promise to fill in. Okay?
Well,
You had asked at the meeting at the Federation of Agriculture AGM, you had asked why there wasn't much uptake on the ALICE program. And as a blueberry grower, we use a lot of marginal land, a lot of land that's questionable whether it's, well, we thought it was blueberry fields. Now it changes to the wetland policy, and wetlands now are it depends on the wetland indicator plants. So I guess a lot of my blueberry fields are now wetlands. And you know, the last people we want on our property are people from the environment, because these guys are on the hunt for infractions. So we'd rather just kind of stay under their radar.
Okay. Maybe I can ask you a little question now, because I didn't find that comment so significant in the sense of volume of time that we're going to feel that you discharged your undertaking to fill that time. But and I've listened very carefully to that comment of why you don't particularly want government officials or environmental people there. But my question to you is this: would it make any difference in the assessment or the determination, Terence, of whether the land can be exempted because it's wetland or it's too steep or because it's environmentally sensitive? Would it make a difference if the people doing the assessment were retired farmers who have no retention or association with government whatsoever, and we just have a report goes from the retired farmers to say whether the land qualifies for that exemption?
Absolutely, it'd make a difference.
Yeah. That was an idea I came up with in the last 24 hours.
But if they
It might even make the report.
If they show up in one of those ugly black uniforms with a gun strapped to their hip, that makes a difference too. And many of us don't want them on our property.
Okay. Thank you. Somebody else, I know a number of you, a fair number of you, and I know that you have comments and opinions. It's just a matter of when it's going to happen, eh? That's the question. Reuben Gunn.
Wow. I know your horse quite well, and I know most of the people here. It's not what I have to say as much as I see the red tape that keeps on existing all the time. On the reduction of land and stuff like that, or increasing it. And I'm not a farmer that has to worry about the land issue and that. But what I see that farmers, when the dying population is going away, then it goes to the big side of the society, sort of, or the bigger farms and stuff like that. Yes, I'm a firm believer that the landholders should stay the same numbers where they are now. I don't see there's any benefit to corporations or landholders gaining more access to land. But let's go to the other side of the coin. I think the land itself, because it's not being utilized or change of, let's say, the land was used 1 and 2 for farming and agriculture, potatoes and all that stuff. Then it's 1 and 3, and 1 and 4. That is a great thing, and nobody can dispute that. And I think the 1 and 4 idea, but that means that the landholder or the guys that are farming the land, let's say, regardless of whether grain, beans, potatoes, whatever, they have to have the opportunity of being able to acquire at least more acres, not own. It gives the opportunity at the end of the day for the said person that owns land that I do not have to sell today just to survive, to make my retirement work. The thing is, in other words, look, I have to sell 100 acres tomorrow morning just because I'm forced to sell. You know, they still own it. They can lease it. They can change it, and it helps the farmer to set their level of, say, like from 3-year to 4-year, and it gives the landowner the opportunity to still hold his land and decide when he wants to sell and what price he wants to sell. In other words, it's not a forced situation. I don't think the landholders should change, numbers should change, but the leaseholders should. And have another limit on the leaseholders. They could take another 500 acres, 200 acres under leasehold. But I'm saying this, the small fella is not pushed out of their home holdings and the retirement packages and stuff like that at a point in time. Okay, that's one comment I have to make. I'm not going to hold you up. The procedures. The procedures of doing, you are on a commission right now, right? The procedures of how the Land Act and stuff like that has been determined in the past is outrageous, ridiculous, because powers of conferred upon a public Inquiries Act confirmed upon Public Inquiries Act is outrageous. Look, I mean, they think that you just come in and just say, you got to do this, you got to do that. Same as officers. They say, wildlife officers, stuff, come out to a man's, what do you call it? He's doing the best he is. If he's got an environmental plan in place, and I know a lot of people, and he's got an environmental plan in place, and the first thing a wild officer walks in, like Mr. McDonald said, packing a gun, and turn around and tapping on his shoulder, on his side, and saying, you know, I think you did this wrong. That's outrageous. Look, I mean, these guys don't have to be packing guns to come around and visit the farmers. Any person that wants to come in and talk to anybody, and I've talked to anybody in the island, and I could have been shot 1,000 times, but I haven't yet, right? I'm still here. Yeah. But the conduct, let's say the conduct of the officers is outrageous. What they've been given as I can say they have a job to a commission, but there's a job. We are not in New York City. We're not in Mexico. We're on one little PI island that's got 140,000 people on it, and we do not have to need. We got police officers. We got all kinds of. We do not have to have environment officers walking around packing guns, walking up to a farmland owner and say, "I think you have crossed the line here." We don't need that. This is outrageous. If they want to put an environmental issue, I'll tell you a little story, and I'll make it very brief too. 2 years ago, an environmental officer walked up to me, or drove in, and then I was on my own property, and he said, "You crossed that stream." I said, "What stream?" I said, "It was a subdivision I had got approved. I had access to cross over it by a little tiny bridge." He said, "I'm going to fine you $250. Good. Great for him. So I accepted that. A year later, him and another environmental officer landed back in, drove right by me in the field, drove right back down, same place. Drove right on by me. So I was in the field at the time. And I drove right down behind them. And I said, "What's your reason being here?" "Oh, we think somebody down here is shooting ducks or don't have a license." Right? Okay. So the two of them were packing two guns, and one guy was really insulting, tapping his gun like inside, like this here, and he said, "Now," I said, I think I'm going to fine you because you didn't shore it up right for crossing the bridge." I said, "You're so." And then he turned around and came up and he wrote me a permit to say, "Yeah, you can go ahead and shore it up. It's all right now." But the two of them packing guns. One guy was standing like this, like John Rogers or Joe Roger Bill, whatever the heck you want to call it. But it was pathetic. Roy Rogers, whatever you want to call it. It was pathetic, is what it was. They don't have to do that to meet the everyday person. Or whatever you like, day 11s, whatever. That's my final, what they call it, bullying. We don't need bullies to operate a little tiny PEI province. And I do see them there. They should be there for the environmental side when something like the seal thing. I don't know whatever happened there. Like this one just in the past week, right? I don't know what happened there. Nobody knows at the moment. If that was a disaster, that is a bad disaster. If somebody did damage, or they just could have been floated in. Something like that, but not intrude on private property. Thank you very much for your time.
Thanks very much. Blair?
Horace, opinion on the limits on land. I think every farm has a different agenda. Like there's farms that are very large and medium and smaller farms.
Yeah. Just speak as loud as you can. Apparently, we've got some type of item over here that is making some noise. So Blair, if you can just speak as... It's cooler. It's got a lot of milk in it.
I think you could, I don't think anybody with the small, medium, or the large farm can survive where they are today. I think there has to be an increase. But don't sell the whole farm. Like there's got to be a limit because once you change it, it's not coming back.
Okay. Do you have any specific suggestions?
Well, the joint ventures that went on in the potato industry in the last year, if you added 1,000 acres onto the 3,000 and 500 onto the 1,000, that would look after everybody.
And is the need, in your opinion, and I should have said this earlier, I guess, everything that is being said here tonight is being recorded, just so it makes it easier for us to know we have a record. It will be available. You can listen to the audio and so forth. But don't misunderstand questions that I make or comments I make. I'm just trying to solicit information. And if you go to all of these meetings, you'll perhaps even find me taking questions, one person one way and another. I'm just trying to get opinions there. Blair, do you see that need, in your opinion, existing to all sectors of the agricultural community?
I would think so.
Yeah. Okay. All right. And where do you see the role of leasing in and leasing out factoring here? Just if I could perhaps explain that a little bit. It used to be that leasing in counted, but leasing out you deducted. And then there was a court case in the late 80s, and there was a court case, I may have misstated a moment ago, but on that point, but the court case determined that when you leased in, it counted, and when you leased out, That's correct. You deduct it. And the government of the day a few years later didn't like that, and so they changed by law what the decision was of the Court of Appeal in this province. So now when you lease in, it counts, and when you lease out, it's not deducted off. Do you have any thoughts or observations on that?
Well, if you control 4,000 acres, that's what you control.
Whether it's owned or whether it's leased?
Yep.
Yep. Okay. And this might be a good time to ask a question that I asked last night. Forgetting the discussion for the moment on the matter of the 1,000 for farmers and the 3,000 for corporations, forgetting those aspects that deal with the farming agricultural community, and remembering that the existing law applies to all residents of the province, how much land you can own. Like, I own no land, okay? My wife owns half an acre, and it's where our house is in Charlottetown. But do you think, I'm not just asking you, Blair, but others, do you think that if you're not involved in the agricultural community, that you need to have the ability to own 1,000 acres of land in Prince Edward Island? Well, I'm just asking the question.
Say it again, please.
I'm just saying that right now, like, a lot of this discussion relates around to the farming community, and later on I want to get it off that and onto some other aspects of the Act. But right now, people, when they hear about raising the limits, it is more or less zeroed in to agriculture. An individual farmer, 1,000 acres. 3 farmers, 3 equal shareholders, 3,000 acres. Okay, so I'm just saying, Blair, taking the comments that you've made and Ruben got, I'm just setting them to a side for a moment, and I'm just asking this question. Do people think that the limit for 1,000 acres pertaining to residents of the province who are not involved in agricultural aspects, should that figure be examined, for example, downward?
Any islander's got a right to buy land.
Well, they have a right to buy land as the law presently exists up to 1,000 acres. Okay, and that 1,000 acres was selected. It wasn't like the 10 Commandments coming down from Mount Sinai again. You know, it could have been 900, it could have been 1,100, whatever. It was 1,000 acres. I'm just asking the question, Terrence.
I'm going to say no.
That it should stay the same?
No, I'm going to say no, that if you're not involved in agriculture, you shouldn't be allowed to buy that much agricultural land.
Okay, and how much land do you think that should be allowed to be bought? Anyway, I'm just trying to get.
I don't know if we want to talk about this. I don't know if we want to talk about this subject, but and I don't know if anybody else had planned to bring it up, but we have a new issue on Prince Edward Island with Venerable Paul and Venerable John and those monks. 1,000 monks with 1,000 acres of land apiece is all Prince Edward Island. I'm not sure if that's a road we want to go down or not. I don't know if people coming in here from other countries buying land to grow food to export back home is the route we want to take. My opinion is no.
The definition of residency is a little different in the Lands Protection Act than in some other statutes. In the Lands Protection Act, it talks about a resident being someone who spends 183 days a year here. Pardon me? Well, don't quite believe everything you read. you almost have to be at the meeting to get the full flavor of the event. No recent events coming across my mind, of course. But it doesn't say consecutive days, and some other statutes do. And so I am, I'm just saying, I'm taking myself as an example. My people have been here since the American Revolution. I'm the first direct carver that hasn't farmed the land. One of those ancestors was a tenant farmer for the great majority of his life in the 1800s. I feel that I am really committed to this province, but I don't own any land. Do I need the right to be able to own 1,000 acres of land if I'm not out there producing land for food and agricultural production? I don't know. Edwin?
One of the I don't want to be part of telling people what they can or can't own. One of the problems we have with people own large tracts of land that don't have a big farm, we have wheat plantations growing next to our properties. And everyone knows that in the farm industry knows that we try to use the least amount of chemicals and insecticides as possible. But when there's large tracts of land held by people that aren't farming, they just become a major problem for people that are.
There was some discussion about 20. Sorry, Blair, go right ahead.
Horace, I forgot to mention, I was up before. Terrence was talking about the Venerable John and Paul there.
Yes.
Up there, that says Land Protection Ex Commissioner. That should be something you deal with before you start dealing with this. Where's it going to stop with that by? And they're taking it out of, they're just taking it out of production. There's no weed control, nothing.
Well, have more discussion on it, gentlemen, ladies, women, men. Reg Phelan, would you like to sit down?
Yeah, probably better.
It's just like back in the classroom in Prince Wales.
Yeah, I remember that time, Horace. It's a few years back. Yeah.
It is a few years back.
Yeah. I would say no to your question, Horace, because I don't think people that are not involved in farming and agriculture should be the ones owning the land. I mean, we had that situation here for a lot of years, when you mentioned earlier in terms of our history here, that was absentee landlords for years, and that had quite an impact, as some of your charter things you mentioned here earlier. And it can be very detrimental, because if it comes down to just who has the amount of money to own land, I don't think the farmers in this country will be owning very much land, if that's the only criteria based on which land is owned. Because farmers, I think now, are too much in debt and just cannot resist the external pressures that are on the situation. And there's quite a bit of land grabbing occurring internationally at a very high rate, and a big rate in some areas, particularly Africa, Europeans, Australia. There's an awful lot of countries where there's an awful lot of land been bought up by speculators. And there's big pension funds, incredible amount of pension funds with a lot of money out there looking to invest. And now, because of the economy in Europe and US and many other places, they're deciding but they think land is the best place to put that money. And there's an incredible amount of funds doing that. And we can't compete with the likes of that, I don't think, if there's no restrictions or no limits in terms of ownership for protection for farmers. Because the amount of money that's involved in some of the pension funds is incredible. It's you can take the RRSPs in Canada. If they decided to put 10% of that money in farmland, that would buy all the farmland in Canada. So it's that in terms of fragile, in terms of how that amount of money's out there and the amount of that pressure's there. So I think we're thankful in Canada and in PEI here that the government you were part of in the early 80s brought in the Lands Protection Act. If we hadn't had the Lands Protection Act in for the last 30 years, I think we'd see an awful difference in PEI than even what's here now. Because there's a number of bigger, larger companies even refused to go with the 3,000 acres at that time, and they kept trying to challenge that in court, going to many areas from it, and many years later, the government had to decide whether they're going to ask them to divest of that land or kind of throw away their limits in terms of the land. And there was a meeting held here in this high school, I think I remember in the late 80s, about that particular issue, because the government at the time, I think it was the Joe Giz government, were kind of wondering about that pressure and wondering if they should let them increase the acreage. And because that one particular company, I think, had probably 7,000 or 8,000 acres at that time. But after hearing the concerns at the meeting here in this high school, which I very largely attended, I think they had enough gumption to go back and say they changed their mind on it and said they weren't going to let it change and they weren't going to let the Irvings own that amount of land at the time. So they had to divest of that land, and they weren't too concerned about doing that at the time either, and they put up a lot of opposition to it. They challenged it in the courts, but eventually the government made them divest of it, and Europe may have been involved in it, I'm not sure in terms of that, but there was quite a bit of effort for them to make them to do that. And if we hadn't had the Lands Protection Act in, that would never have happened. And I think the land here would have been wide open to speculation from other places, and we don't have the wherewith in order to compete with that. And that's probably why I think even back in the 70s and the early in the 80s and otherwise, that there was quite a bit of opposition to the PEI to foreign ownership. Because at that time they thought if foreign ownership went unabated, that most of PEI would have been sold out in a very short time if it kept at that stages. And that's why the legislation was brought in at those times and a couple of royal commissions set up. So I think we're unfortunate to have those kind of restrictions there, or otherwise you'd see a different PEI and I think a whole different structure of what would happen here. And if time, I could probably say that I would agree with the restrictions been staying as they are in terms of the Lands Protection Act, because I think we need them.
So you would say that in regards to the 1,000 acres as it pertains to farmers and 3 for a corporation, 3 equal shareholders, you would agree with that. But apropos my question about if you were a non-farmer, you think the limit should be less.
Yes.
And you may have thought about this before and you may not, but would there be a figure that would come to mind about that? If you're a non-farmer, how much land you would have the right to own?
There's been recommendations made before, I think, particularly before the Lands Protection Act came in, saying that they didn't want corporate interest owning any big amounts of land, because if the idea was that farmers should be the ones that farming and having some control over that operation rather than having others do it. And at that time there was recommendations for 50 acres, which I think would be reasonable.
I think even though I own nothing, it seems a little on the low side, Reg.
Well, it could be, but I mean, I think if someone, you can have it a little higher. I mean, I'm not pushing that point on it. I would say if you can keep the Lands Protection Act the way it is without moving, I think would be very important. And I end up doing a fair bit of work on this, as you know, Horace, in terms of that.
Well, I only know it because, I get a fair number of emails from people and some telephone calls and a few letters and things like that. But got a telephone call to return a call to Reg Phelan the other day, so I decided to call him back and made sure he was coming to the meeting and so forth. In the course of our conversation, he told me that he had done a master's thesis in this whole area of land ownership in Prince Edward Island, St. Mary's University, about 15 plus 20 years ago. And so I asked him if I could have a copy. He told me it was rather voluminous, so it was available at the Confederation Center Library in UPI. And I made sure I got a copy, and he was correct about one thing: it was thick. And whether you agree with Reg's thesis or not, I will say this: it is probably one of the best papers that I have read. It's extraordinarily interesting. It gets into land, but also gets into social history. And I hope that in this school library, there's a copy of his report. It's fascinating to read. Now, do you have other comments, or can we put you to a side for a moment? And do people have any questions they'd like to respond to Reg on this? Do you have a...
Whichever is your wish, Horace. Yeah, I could. There's a couple other points I'd like to make, but I can do that later on.
Yeah, I think we'll have you do it later on, if
yep.
that's okay.
Yep.
All right. Mr. Dingwall, Rodney, you were one of the people who sent me an email.
I'm going to get into that later on, but I was wondering when you talked about the leasing in and leasing out,
Yes.
I was under an impression there that when you leased out, it got subtracted off your limit. I guess I'm not up to date with the laws. But if I lease land out, presumably somebody is leasing that in and counting it. Are we counting the same acre twice?
Yes.
Is there something inherently wrong about that?
Not in the opinion of those that enacted the
Well,
particular provision and those that are doing the
your
present
opinion.
county.
I'm asking your opinion, I guess.
Well, it seems a little interesting.
Yeah.
Well, there's no point in having this meeting and making rules if they're gonna be no good.
Sorry, Blair, just explain that a little bit
Like,
more.
if you're gonna put rules in and they're gonna be counted wrong and everything, what the hell's the point in having these meetings going through this? If it's a limit, make it that limit.
Not sure I fully quite understand that comment, but I just want to go back to Rodney here in the leasing for a second. The provision that now operates and has operated for about 15 years is this, that if you lease 100 acres in, you have to count it. And if you lease out 100 acres, you still have to count it. Okay? And the rationale supposedly behind it is they were having too many situations of where the leasing out was a sham. Okay? That it was just a piece of paper was signed, and the person who was really the lessee or the tenant really had no control or over the land whatsoever. It was just another attempt by the landowner. And I'm not saying that that rationale was right or wrong. I'm saying that is the behind it. But it's a situation that's quite difficult to explain, how you can have 100 acres of land and Rodney can count that because he owns it and he leases it to Blair McDonald, and Blair McDonald has to count it as well. Pardon me, Rodney? Well, it's perhaps even more than that. It's quite. Yes, it is interesting. Last night I used the word unique, and maybe I'll use it. Blair?
With not control of that land, if you have control of whatever number of acres it is, that's your acres. Leasing in and leasing out means nothing. You have this many to control whatever way you control it.
Yep, and Blair, that is the way the law is now. It may make a distinction on the form that's filled out between owning it and leasing it, but it's still in the large total of 1,000 if you're an individual with 1,000, or 3 if you've got a corporation with 3 equal shareholders. But increasingly, people seem to be having a difficulty understanding why, if I lease land in and I pay for the rent and I have complete control over it, and you add that in your total of 1,000, and then you, because of crop rotation, you take around and you have 100 acres and you lease it to Edwin McKee, and he's got control of it, and he does certain things, why that still has to be counted as part of your total, and yet Edwin has to count as part of his total.
Horace, I have a hell of a time trying to understand that too. It makes no sense at all.
Okay. Mr. Rowe.
Thank you. I'd like to use a different word, and I think the word is asinine. Because if you look at the history of Prince Edward Island, farmers in Prince Edward Island have been cooperating for hundreds of years. If we expect the 1 in 3 or 1 in 4 rotation to work, there's no reason why Farmer A can't grow his 1,000 acres of potatoes 1 year and then exchange that property with his next door neighbor and let him grow his 1,000 acres of grain, and then another farmer down the road his 1,000 acres of hay. Why do we have to deal with all this blankety-blank red tape of leasing in and leasing out. My father, I think back in 1954, was the first person to begin consolidation of farms in Prince Edward Island, well, in our community. And it was a major thing because I remember him saying, I think it was all of about 8 or 9 years old, and he said, we can't make a living on 100 acres. We only have 55 acres clear. We can't make a living on that. That was 1954. So he goes and he buys another farm, which is approximately another 100 acres, or 135, and doubles production. And we still see the same thing happening today, but we have all these other rules and regulations. And I think that, and there's a lot of farmers, I'm not exactly farming, but I've been tied to the land for the last 68 years. And I think that the rules and regulations are the things that need to be dealt with. I've got 5 kids. What's to stop me from owning and controlling 5,000 acres of land through my 5 kids and 1,000 acres through my own right? And my wife might even be interested in some land, like yours.
She owns half an acre.
Exactly. Well, mine's all joint ownership, so I don't have too much control. We have to ask her first. So I think those are the kinds of things that we need to look at. We have a couple of maps back here. I just want to make another point while I'm here.
Absolutely, please.
I think the information that's on the maps is somewhat helpful, but any of you who know a little bit of the history of Prince Edward Island know that we have about maybe 500 or maybe 600,000 acres of land that's arable land in Prince Edward Island. There's also supposed to be about 700,000 in woodland. We have 26,000 corporations that own 33% of the land, but a lot of these are corporations that may or may not be directly involved in farming or in controlling land. There are other corporations in Prince Edward Island. And I think it would be interesting to look at the statistics from the point of view of the corporations that are dealing with land, because I personally know individuals that control 10,000 acres of land, not 2,000 or 3,000. And last night we learned that you can opt out approximately 40%. So if I own 3,000 acres of land and I have some I want to give to Terrence, that's he's going to turn into blueberry land, he's welcome to it. I'm just going to take it out of my own. I can all of a sudden go up to 4,200 acres of land. So I have 3,000 acres of good arable land, and I have another 1,200 acres that's wetland or woodland. And for the life of me, I can't understand why woodland is being considered, let's say, not valuable land, because of the definitions I heard last night and people talking about it. At one time, we had a forestry industry in PEI. That's, one of my pet peeves. The second thing is the amount of acreage owned by non-residents. We have to look at where the non-residents got involved in the land. A lot of times, people leave Prince Edward Island. 100 years ago, in the early 1900s, we had 85% of the people lived on Prince Edward Island in rural areas. We had 15% in urban areas. It's totally reversed in the opposite, and everybody today seems to want to live within 10 miles of Charlottetown or Summerside. We now have 85% of our population in urban areas and 15 in the rural areas. So the statistics that say that we're, densely populated, yes, we have 140,000 people. We still have the same amount of acreage, but it's totally changed. And the people who live and work on the land look upon the land differently than the people who drive out from Charlottetown or Summerside and work on the farm. There's a whole changing in attitude between people working on the land and people owning the land and working the land. And a lot of those people that maybe, whether they're non-residents or what have you, maybe the land was passed on to them from their grandfathers or their fathers, and they live in Toronto or they live in Calgary, and they just happen to have a non-resident address, like some, more famous people than myself. So those are the kinds of issues that I think you have to deal with over the next 2 or 3 months, because they're not cut and dried. We talk about regulating the amount of land people own. How did they get the land? Maybe these retired farmers who moved to Charlottetown to live in some of the You know, the fancy condos. Maybe they're leasing their land. They're still involved in farm. They're not on the farm, but maybe they're leasing their land to their next door neighbor before they left. So there's all those issues. But I think the first thing you have to look at is how much land is owned by corporations across Prince Edward Island that are actually involved in farming or maybe even forestry. Thank you.
Thank you. Non-resident ownership. In order to acquire, if a person is a non-resident of Prince Edward Island, that's someone who is here less than 183 days, the time they acquire the land. If they wish to buy more than 5 acres of land, they need the approval of Executive Council, the Provincial Cabinet. If they want to buy more than 165 feet of shore frontage, they have to get the approval of Executive Council. And it is possible at the present time for people to convey from themselves, their spouse, and their parents, and their siblings, and children, and grandchildren lands without going through that particular process. Do you have any thoughts and the fee that is given to IRAC is the greater of $550 per application or 1% of the purchase price. So if a non-resident was buying the property for $100,000, the fee would be $1,000, and that goes to IRAC, processing the applications and so forth. We didn't get into any of this last night in Vernon River, but does anyone have any comments on, and there was a study done just recently by the Tourism Division of the University of Prince Edward Island for the Department of Tourism that indicated a significant economic impact of non-residents to the economy of Prince Edward Island. Any comments about non-resident ownership and people, the expression is from away. I'm married to a woman from Halifax, almost 40 years, and she's learned a long time ago that she'll never be from here. She's always from away. Any comments on this, folks? Yes, Ruben. Pardon me? How would you like to sit down at the table? I found it a little hard to hear you last time. Maybe this mic is a little better. Would that be okay?
Oh, no difference. You can hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I'm going to direct my opinion on 2 or 3 different things. And I started one already with on the farm, the land acquisition holdings. And I still stated that shouldn't change, the 1,000, 3,000, and I think the lease holdings. And I listened to a couple of farmers there, and I'm not a farmer. My father always was, but anyway, neither here nor there. I don't think I think the identification of lease holdings is really an issue that should be addressed. I mean, if I lease land, I got to identify it, and I sublease. It's not rocket science. That the sublease should be identified, and that land shouldn't have to be one person should not have to identify it as a second person is holding that, doing that use of that land. Like I mean, it's not rocket science to see that. If I have 3,000 acres under lease, and I sublease it to somebody else, why should he record it on that way there? I don't know where the rocket science has to fall, but I mean, it's simple. I lease 3,000 acres, and I sublease 1,000 acres to another farmer for another use,
So the
It's still-
1,000 should come off year 3, is that what you're saying?
No, if I have a subleasing,
Yeah.
I still control it. The subleaser, it's still, you're controlling the 3,000 acres, right? The subleaser shouldn't have to, if he's not using it for the same production level that I was using it. Like, if I was using for potatoes, and you're using for beans, and the next fellow's using for hay, why should everybody record it? That's how you're getting lost in the rep road. Like, I mean, it's a lost situation.
So would you, maybe make sure I don't misunderstand, but so if a person owns 1,000 acres and they lease out 100,
Yes.
at the present time, the person has to record 1,000 acres, and the person that gets the leased land 100 has to record the 100 acres. Are you saying that you lease out 100 acres, that the 100 comes off the 1,000?
No.
No.
No. The person's the big primary problem here is usage. Potatoes is the biggest culprit for the moment. Like, I mean, that's what everybody's trying to. 1 in 4, right? 1 in 3 now is supposed to be 1 in 4 for usage. And then you have after the other cultivation. Long as the cultivation is named one potatoes this year, beans next year, grain, hay, or vice versa, you know, like on that category, why should be a problem? And then all the farmers does not have to get into all the bureaucrats that are trying to run the show that haven't got a clue what's going on. Like, I mean, everybody's on the field. This guy's doing that wrong, the other fellow's doing something else wrong. I don't understand that. There is, it seems so simple. The farmer that leases the land has to report what the activity was at. If he leased it for 3 years or 4 years, he has to produce the activities where it went. End of story.
Maybe it would be helpful if you were to take the time and to send me an email or a little bit of a paper, to even a page long, to just give me some examples and a little bit more along that lines, if that would be okay, because we're starting to get halfway through the meeting, and I would like to get on to a couple of other topics if I could, Ruben.
Yeah, okay. Can I move on then?
How many more? Okay.
Just a couple topics. The open door, $1,000 or 1,000 acre per person.
Yes.
Okay, whether it's a non-islander or it's got to be an islander, but a non-person that's developing land.
Yes.
Okay, you tell me where the draw line is, where development land is what? Developed for blueberries, cranberries, just standing woodland, all those categories. You just tell me where those things stand and tell me that you can't have an ownership of 1,000 acres. Regardless whether you're non-islander or you have to be an islander to own that. But how you categorize that? And then you categorize the tax system of that, of what it's worth. And then you come down to the government on the same level. They turn it over to Fish and Wildlife. They buy land, they take it over, and they turn it over to Fish and Wildlife. They take it over, they turn it to forestry. It all depends which one of the corporations is buying it. And then they turn it over to conservation or whatever. Management. They get no management practices at all. I'm talking about forestry. They're way behind their scheme. Fish and Wildlife, they just turn over to forestry. And the conservation there's no management. So you're saying take 1,000 acres from any particular person that lives in PI, and the province cannot manage their own resources. Thank you very much.
All right, and send me perhaps something in writing on your thoughts, if that would be possible, please.
No problem, thank you.
Does anyone else wish to raise anything at any time right now? Because I've got and I'm not trying to cut off a discussion at all. I know that I do want to get to Rodney Dingwall, because he raised some issues in an email to me about succession planning and that type of situation, if it's okay to pick on you a little bit. But we're going to get there eventually. But somebody else have anything you'd like to say or respond to? Yes, please. Okay, Sterling.
I just got one simple question. Do you have to be a landowner to participate in this? Is this for landowners only? Oh,
No.
so then myself as a senior citizen and an ex-farmer, which once my income.
And an ex-fisherman.
Ex-fisherman who ceases from the farm. If I ain't leasing land out, then I'm automatically falling under dictatorship where my taxes is deducted on it. You know, we're living in a democracy is supposed to be here, and we're being ruled by dictatorship. And if the outside source, if there's 10 or 20% owns the land, and all taxpayers get the same input standing outside telling you what to do or where you should move, how come make more than that meetings? Where the ones that are working the land or has been stored to the land all their life might write them up on their back phone. We have mostly all landowners on Riverside here, but if you're not a landowner and your voice is sort of ruled under dictatorship.
Well, we're pretty
Sorry.
We're pretty fortunate to live in the country we live in, and I didn't expect to say this again tonight, but if we hadn't been successful about 30 plus years ago in having the right to own property excluded from the Canadian Constitution that Prime Minister Trudeau was bringing back from London as part of the Charter of Rights and Freedom, we wouldn't probably be having any discussion here tonight at all, because there would be no Lands Protection Act whatsoever. And we entered Confederation under certain clear rules. Sir John A. lent or gave us money in order to buy out British landlords. And under the Constitution that we joined in 1873, the right of property was to belong to Prince Edward Island. Now, I know there are some people who hold the opinion that, well, if Prince Edward Island hadn't won that debate against the federal government in 1980, then there'd be no Land Protection Act. Well, you carry that reasoning to its logical conclusion, then there'd be no rights or abilities whatsoever for the province of Prince Edward Island to regulate any form of land laws whatsoever. And if that occurred, I doubt there would be a commission dealing with the Lands Protection Act tonight at all, because some of the things that would have happened this past 30 years are quite remarkable. Now, so we're very fortunate to live in the type of democracy we live in. The gentleman in the back row, right beside Blair, you've got some papers in your hand, and why don't you take a chair over there, please?
I'm just going to speak to one point, just the question that you asked.
Sure. And your name?
It's Grant Compton, and according to the Super Bowl ad last weekend for Dodge, I fit the description as one of the farmers.
I didn't watch the Super Bowl except for the last 4 or 5 minutes.
Well, the ad was better than the game. No, it was a very good ad for farms. Just to respond to your question about non-ownership of land that may come out of production, I found a quote from the late Gilbert Clemens in 1974 when he stated his response to the Royal Commission on Land Ownership. He said, "There will be weeping and wailing in this province because our good agricultural land has been taken out of production and it will be impossible to get back." So I wasn't sure how that was going to fit into some of the notes I made and I'm going to leave with you, but I think it's appropriate at that for the question that you asked, that we're afraid because we're losing so much land from urbanization and some of the erosion of people's passion to protect the land for the farmers, that it's important to realize that his words still speak true today, 30 years later.
Just don't leave there, no, Grant. someone was quoting someone else recently to me and saying that quite a difference when the last crop on a parcel of land happens to be asphalt. Okay. And I apologize, I don't believe I've met you before, but you're farming?
Yeah, I'm a potato farmer.
Okay.
Yeah, and local or third generation. One of the things I think as far as the land limits is, I think we all can agree that the main spirit of the Lands Protection Act's limits is to prevent someone coming in and owning large numbers of acres, but I think we can all agree that we can't just put a limit on it and leave it there forever. In order for any organization to be successful, whether it be a farm or government or a nonprofit, you have to allow for growth. And growth is usually incremental in successful operations, and it's hard to grow with one hand tied behind your back because you're not allowed to make incremental growth. So we're asked to produce crops with the same limits 30 years later, but our input costs have gone up pretty much every year for the last 30 years. So it's tough to make a go if the limits aren't going to change and allow for some growth by the farms and the farm families that are out there now.
I'm not picking on you. It's just that you seem an appropriate individual to, at this time, to ask the question that I asked last night. And I'm really hopeful that during this process, perhaps sooner as opposed to later, that one or more individuals are going to bring forth some type of a study or even their own analysis about how it can be more profitable for the existing farm operation if they become bigger. Like I hear these expressions, we need to have a certain amount to do this and do that, but and I also, as I did last night, asked the other side of the question. People say, well, small is the better way to go, and you need to be smaller. Well, you know, the carvers were in Hazelbrook for a long, long time. And when I grew up, we were the largest property landowner in that community of Hazelbrook. And that's my dad and grandfather owned 180 acres of land. That was pretty big then, when I was a kid. People would laugh at that today and say you're a big farmer. So I'm not necessarily putting this obligation on you, but if you could, and I'm not sure what's in your document, look forward to receiving it, but if you and others, individually or otherwise, could start producing some document or paper or some evidence of what to back up what they say, that we need more land in order to be more successful, and if we don't have that, then it's going to hurt our bottom line and we're going to be out of business. On the other hand, for those individuals that think smaller is better and this is the way to go, then I would like to start seeing some evidence and documentation about that. So you up for sending me a letter in addition to what you got there?
I'll put my head around it.
He met with Morris, he's a wealth of knowledge.
But the focus has been really on the past too, to some degree, because in the last 10 years, the potato acreage has gone down 30,000 acres, which is astounding. And there's been tremendous diversification on the island. We've gone into some great berry crops. There's soybeans, canola. There's niche crops that are now being grown, and the infrastructure's there in most farms. A lot of people are wanting to get away from the monoculture or the one trick pony, but So a lot of farms have infrastructure to do other things, and sometimes the land limits will kind of hold you back because some of the other acreages take up some larger acres as well. So there has to be like a focus on the future as well to allow for some expansion in other areas. And it's just important that we don't tie the hands of the future farmers in the future direction and diversification in farm. Yeah.
Thank you. You going to give me that paper?
Yeah.
Thank you.
I'll give it to you when I'm done.
Okay.
Yeah. Thanks.
Tonight?
Yeah.
Thank you. I haven't forgot you, Reg, because we're coming back there. Rodney, is it time to... one of the things that impressed me in your email was the discussion you had, and if you wish to sit down, please do so, about generation and transferring, and that, if I could be so personal as to indicate that apparently you have a shareholders agreement in your family, in which I don't know what lawyer did it or what family member agreed to it, that at age 65 you have to retire. And it apparently...
Well, I don't know if I can blame the lawyer for that or my wife. But
probably...
anyway, we and I'll do it on a very personal
Please.
case because that's what I'm familiar with. But I'm sure there may be others that are similar. We have a shareholders agreement in place, and I farm with a brother and a son, and we each own a third of the operation. And in the shareholders agreement is a provision for each of us as we reach the age of 65 to retire and for certain compensation. But the flip side of that is then that the retiring shareholders' shares or interest in the business would go to the other shareholders. Well, when you convert that to land holding issues, in our case, we own a block of land, and that doesn't put us in contravention of the current land holding limits, but we also rent a number of acres of land on a seasonal basis, some of them from the gentleman that just sat here. And when you add those two blocks of land up, and I have to report them to IRAC before December 31st, and we do, and they come close. They aren't in violation, but they come close to the 3,000 acres total that we're allowed. And so given the case then that I may want to retire, as I'm the senior member, the two remaining shareholders are reporting the same land mass in contravention. Now, yeah, they could probably divest of some of the acres or not rent as many, but maybe they want to compensate me for my shares, so that means they need a level of income. Maybe I was doing something while I was there, so they may have to replace me. So they're going to need, to run the farm and run it viably, they're going to need at least as many acres or change the job that we're doing. And I'm not sure that's the intention of the Lands Protection Act, is to force you into doing something else. Like maybe we could grow cranberries and have a similar level of income or wealth, I don't know, on less acres.
Cranberries are pretty hard to get growing.
Oh, well, I used that as an example. We could probably...
And I don't want to take away from your point, because I think it's an awfully interesting one. But in your particular instance of where you were there with your brother and your son, and both of them are here tonight, right?
Yes.
That, and you want out, I think it might be possible for your lawyer, and thank you very much in your email for offering that I can speak with your lawyer if I wish. I found that very, very kind, and kind isn't the right word, but very open, I might say. You could perhaps take your share in a certain form of payment over time and go from being an ordinary shareholder to being a preferred shareholder with voting rights that probably would still make you fit within the parameters of the statute. But forget that. Let's say that you tragically die long before your parents' age. And then what do you have? Now, I know that the IRAC and the rules give you a certain period of time, but quite frankly, estates are becoming far more complicated. And if you want to keep that same land mass in production as your unit, then you have to find another person to become in as an equal shareholder. And some people are saying to me that that's not easy to find another equal shareholder that comes in to be involved in that situation. Anyway, I just ask you if you have any comments, Rodney.
Yeah, no, and that no doubt is an alternative, but I'm not sure that that's what, if that's the correct answer, or if the correct answer is to look at some other mechanism of addressing a situation where...
No, I'm not trying to, once again, I'm not trying to make
Neither
suggestions.
am I.
No, I'm just trying to solicit information, and I found your email extremely helpful, but I thought given the contents of your email, you should try to make the point tonight as well in front of these people.
And one other point I'd like to make, and that I mentioned it to you also in the email, and it has to do with red tape.
That's reference number 2 here.
Yeah. And I just make it for information, but this past summer we had an opportunity to purchase a property that we had been renting for a number of years. Had been renting and had been reporting as rented land. So when the application went to IRAC for us to purchase the land, somehow A and B didn't add up to C or D. They thought that we were in excess of our land holding limits rather than substituting rented acres for owned acres. And I know there's an application fee to IRAC, but this was also a cost to our firm because this took a period of time to get sorted out with legal help and to make sure that it was the same acre that we were talking about. So that's just a red tape issue.
I'm not sure that there's an application fee to IRAC if you are a resident corporation in Prince Edward Island where all the shareholders are equal. But there's certainly a cost to your farming unit that's paid to my profession.
Oh, yes, but this was, I stand to be correct,
Well,
you should know, but I thought there was a fee that we paid to IRAC along with our legal fees.
Well, I'm going to find that out tomorrow, but the last time I dealt with a situation where a resident corporation, there was no fee paid if you're a resident corporation with resident shareholders, but we'll find out, I'll find that out and I'll report back to you on that. But there's something not quite correct with your fact situation. I'm not critical of you, but if you had reported everything as previously, then when you come to buy a piece of land that's already been reported, that should have not been an issue on that point.
I agree.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much. Others would like to make comments? Alvin Keenan, incoming president of the Federation of Agriculture.
Horace, I want to speak for myself tonight, not on behalf of the Federation of Agriculture.
Okay.
And later on, the Federation will make a submission. It's a very... the questions that we have are great, and the answers are very concerning. as we go down through this, the Land Protection Act has been an issue, like with the family farm operation that I have, and our farm operation. We will make a presentation to you, a written presentation, and I came here. I didn't come here tonight prepared to straighten out all my concerns. I don't think it's possible for anybody to, but. In a way, the land ownership and then who owns the land, I don't think it matters. But when it comes down to law, it does. And a few years ago, we visited Hawaii, my wife and I, on our 25th anniversary. And some of the comedy was that, just in discussion, that when the British first discovered Hawaii, they traded steel fish hooks for the land. And as they were leaving, they felt they got a real deal. And the natives were laughing because they said, "You can't own land, the gods own it." And I often thought about that because I live in Prince Edward Island, and it kind of made me think just a little bit further. And the difference between a long life and a short one's a moment in time, and some, and as we know this, it changes very fast. And what I thought would be the deal, and what I thought what would come in succession when I started farming years ago, it's altogether different today. The people that required in succession to take over a farm operation that we've grown to, that people have grown to what it is. Take over a farm operation, I think you may be quite qualified to work for Lexus or somebody in some organization to manage that. It might be simpler. And I know I'm philosophizing here. We have a lot of concerns, and I will say this: what I mostly want is for people to ask all the questions they can, and be sure they explain what they think their problems are, and it will help. So when these hearings are over, you can have the best that you could accomplish from this, and that's a huge challenge. And but
it's a bigger challenge than perhaps I first realized when I said yes.
Well, I can appreciate that, because when the resolution went through Federation of Agriculture a year ago to open this up, naturally I was concerned that, oh my soul, now we have to deal with something that we don't know how to deal with. And we can change the limits from 1,000 to 1,500 acres, and we can change it from 3,000 to 4,500 per corporation. And then the questions comes up: how many people how many people in the corporation should there be? And as succession changes, how do you deal with that? And if I look at our farm operation home, the shareholders in it are one thing, but the amount of people that you employ, and they take their total income from the farm, they're really no different than the shareholders, other than they don't have a legal, say on how the operation is run. Although you constantly consult them daily on the work that they're doing and what can be done to make things, make things more productive or better. So I just want to share that with you, and we have discussions that. These are some of the discussions that we have in our own office, and I can say this, that it doesn't matter how many shareholders a corporation should have. That's a very common. And why are we a corporation? Well, we incorporated because, for legal reasons, for the law, for the laws in just to theoretically, if there's an issue, you attack the company, not the individuals, and I know that they're not very far away. But anyway, that's I wanted to touch on that with you, and I have all kinds of things I can say, but there's one little saying my grandmother had, and she said, after all is said and done, there'll be more said than done, and I'm afraid sometimes things like that are accurate, but we had a fair amount of peace prior to this being opened up, and now as people, we're concerned and darn concerned on what will come out of it. And at the end of the day, and there's a lot of questions here tonight, you know, should non-farmers own 1,000 acres of land? And then if the answer is no, they shouldn't, then how much should they own? And all those things. What's best for Prince Edward Island? And I think it's a big concern that we have. What is the best so our province cannot have to operate in a deficit budget? How can we accomplish that as residents in PEI? And those are some of our challenges. And the potato industry alone, you know, and the economic spin-off from it, it's in excess of $1 billion. And there's absolutely no reason in the world why that couldn't be twice that much. There's so many things that can be accomplished in the way that we market our products and what have you. And with the value of the nutrition of the food and the other sectors. So we have a lot. There's an awful lot in this that can make this more positive, and that's our challenge as we go across the province. To at the end of the day, not just satisfy ourselves and be cautious of our own. You know, be sure that our desires are the same, or be sure that our wants are not different than our desires. So when we finish, that we can be successful as a province and continue to grow. And we'll have to visit these things. I'm going to leave it at that now. I haven't given you a lot of any answers to the questions. I think I've just asked more questions, but they're extremely. Agriculture in Prince Edward Island is extremely important to us, and people that travel. I haven't traveled the world, but people that I consider have, and I've had an opportunity to ask this several times in my life. What's the nicest place you've been? What's the best? And they'll just look around. Now, they're generally not here when we're having, as Boomer would say, a nor'easter, but they'll say Prince Edward Island, and I think we feel proud of that, and we want to continue to be. And there's discussions earlier tonight about large tracts of land controlling that aren't farmed, and they grow up in different species. And I know. I don't know what's good or bad about that. Sometimes the land can have a little bit have a rest and not be wrong for the environment. But we do have a lot of issues in agriculture with viruses that wild crops are hosts for, and it prevents it, so we're not able to have the status of have the low virus potato seed that we need to compete in the marketplace, and these varieties today that give us the yields that are required to be competitive take sick very easy. And so we do need an environment to produce them in that is less contaminated. And I think some of the questions that I think some of the answers that we need for these questions has to come from good agronomy as well. And that's extremely important to us. And anyway, I'll leave that alone. I'm getting off too far. I'll give you we'll make a submission from our own operation, and hopefully we'll speak for the Federation.
Thank you, Alvin.
Thank you.
Blair.
Of course, back to what we were talking about earlier, this land is being bought up in Kings County in large tracts and taking out of production land that the people of PEI will never get to use again. Is the government doing anything about that?
Well, if you look at the terms of reference, when you're dealing with the Lands Protection Act, you're dealing with ownership of land, and what you are suggesting would clearly fall within the parameters of ownership of land. I'm not sure whether you're talking about individual residents who own land or non-residents who own land, but if you look at the last few words of terms of reference number 3, it talks about information and deeming requirements for nonprofit corporations. And those are,
It's Terrence's buddies there I'm talking about. He spoke about earlier the veterans there, John Morell.
and it gets into the whole area of something that I was sort of raising earlier on with my question. Okay. And it's a question that Horace Carver has thought about quite a bit. Last night was the first time I raised it publicly. Tonight's the second time. And that is, if we're concerned about the land, and we're concerned about it being viable and renewable for years to come, then how you treat that land is going to be extraordinarily important. When I had my public debate with the Prime Minister, 1980 Prime Minister Trudeau, and we sat right beside Alberta, and they were all talking about energy and oil and all that type of stuff. And one of the points I made then is that sometime the oil of Alberta will be gone. There will be no more. But how we treat the top 15 inches of our soil and how we renew it and how we care for it will determine whether we're able to grow and produce and live off that land until this world no longer exists. And the question I was asking, and it's not an indication of where I am. If I say one thing, I'm sure that's the broken record. If we are interested in land, and if you're interested in good husband stewardship service, attention to the land, and if we're primarily supposed to be concerned about ecology and the environment and dealing with the land, does there come a point in time where you need to look at residents of this province, even non-residents, but I'm chiefly interested in residents, and how much land they ought to own if they're not involved actively in producing and caring for the land? Because you can create a fact situation, Blair, of where people who are residents of the province don't need approval from Executive Council, and they can go out and buy 990 acres of land, and the only thing, they can pay cash for it, they can write checks, they can get, there's no shortage of members of my profession to process deeds, and the only thing that happens when they have acquired the land is the next year they have to report it because they're over 750 acres. Okay? And if you do that enough times, you get to a point of where there's a significant tip in the balance of what is happening to the land, even though it's owned by residents of the province.
But most of that land, Horace, is back in production. The stuff I'm talking about is we will never get to produce on that land again. It's gone to a foreign land.
Okay, well, let me ask you this. How does it leave an owner to get someplace else? Well, it gets there, does it not, Blair? Because somebody comes along and offers X dollars for it, and the vendor says, I need this and I'll sell it. And then you get into that whole discussion is if a person owns land, does the right of ownership include the right of sale? And when I was in cabinet 30 years ago, one of my best friends was Proust Chappell, a remarkable man, Minister of Agriculture. And he would countless times come to the cabinet table and tell us of situations of where farmers wanted to sell their land because there was no more sons or daughters to carry in the land, and they had put their retirement into it and they whatever. So it's a very complicated question, and I'm not in any way trying to diminish your question. I'm just saying that I need people to express their opinions and thoughts on these matters. It's no good for me. I mean, I could stand up for hours here tonight and philosophize and do a whole bunch of things and give you examples. I need to hear from you guys and how you feel about these matters. And some of the questions you're asking, Blair, are very, very difficult questions. Mr. Rowe.
Horace, can you tell us how, or what the deeming requirements are in terms of the non-profit corporation, number one? And number two, if I move to Prince Edward Island, I'm here 6 months, and I buy 1,000 acres of land, what happens if in 2 years' time I move off the island, and then I'm a non-resident? What happens to my 1,000 acres of land?
Well, you've asked two questions. The second one I'm going to answer first. Nothing happens. You have already become an owner of the property. You are a resident of the province. At the present time, there is no tracking to make it that if you leave the province that you some go into a different status, except for the purpose of taxation. Okay? And that only happens if the provincial treasury has found out that you've left the province and you are now using a non-Prince Edward Island address. Okay? If you were having your property tax bill go to the Honeybee Association, then that's where it's going to be, and government will never find that out unless somebody decides to report it. And the matter of deeming is it's a very interesting legal concept, and it's a concept that requires some additional work. And this whole matter of nonprofit corporations, at the present time, for corporations, like for example, if you have one corporation over here and it's well below the 3,000 acres, and you have another corporation over here and it's also well below the couple of thousand acres, there is a provision in the existing law that enables the minister to determine that that situation I just described is controlled by a partnership, a cooperative, controlled by an individual, controlled by a group, whatever that word means, and therefore they can take it all together and so forth. And before this process is over, that's something that I need to hear people speak about, and I need to spend more time myself in research and explore more this whole matter of deeming, because it is important and it's interesting.
Well, we need to know if there's going to be a non-limited number of acreage that can go to a non-profit group. Is it limited? Is it unlimited? I mean, can it be 10,000, or is it going to be 1,000, or what? I mean,
there is no
sense of beating around the bush and giving
I'm
us legal.
I'm not beating around the bush. If there's one thing you should know about, two things you should know about me, I'm as independent as can be. Right. And the second thing is what you see is what you get. But at the present time, there is no distinction in our law between a private corporation and a non-profit corporation and a corporation that's publicly traded on the Toronto Stock Exchange. Okay. And non-profit corporation can be everything from your local soccer team to your local church to your local rink to umpteen different things. And in a non-profit corporation, there are no shareholders. It's a collection of individuals. I think it's fair to say that the matter of non-profit corporations was given little, if any, thought when the passage of the Act took place in 1982. I am almost certain of that. Okay. And like, I've done some work for churches, and they want to get incorporated, and I recommend churches get incorporated for all the reasons that Alvin Keenan says, liability and everything else. But if they're in excess of 5 acres of land, They got a cemetery attached to it. It's through IRAC, okay? In the whole matter of taxation, nonprofit corporations, as I understand it, the provincial government gives them a tax exemption status for the church, preps the cemetery, but they don't give them for 50 acres of land that may be adjacent to the church in that area. Am I answering your question directly? Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Now, the first question.
About the deeming?
What was the first question, Mr. Carroll?
Deeming.
Guy that moves off the aisle buys 1,000
The guy that moves off the island.
No. Well, I think I've already answered it, but I'll make it more clear, is that when the person is a resident of the province and they get, I actually thought that was the second question, when the person in the province gets the 900 acres of land, and then in a couple of years' time they move outside the province, nothing happens to them except that their property tax bill could go up for double if the provincial government finds out about it. However, if when they move out the province, they were able to do some legal documentation so that their parent or a relative resident in the province retained a life interest in the property, then the tax rate is the same as if the non-resident owner was still living in PI. All right?
So if I belong to the Hells Angels, and I come to the island and live here for a year, and I buy 1,000 acres of land, and then I move away, and then another member comes here and they buy 1,000 acres of land, all of a sudden the Hells Angels can own 20,000 acres of land, and there's not a damn thing we can do about it.
Well, you don't have to be here for a year. Just
6
one.
months.
Well, and it's not even consecutive. It's accumulated, 183 acres. Yes, my apology. I'm occupied with ground. 183 days.
Exactly.
Okay. Yes, Bertha?
Just to clarify that point, that initial point about the person that moves off
Yes.
after buying 900 acres, would they be obligated to fill the form out because they were beyond the 750?
Yes.
They are?
Yes.
So that happened?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
On a yearly basis?
On a yearly basis.
Yeah.
Okay. And in fact, there was a high-profile case of investigation a few years ago involving a non-resident who owned a fair bit of land in Kings County, Bertha, close to that point. But you see, what happens now is when people acquire, and this is why I was trying to get the discussion going earlier about non-residents coming here, and the government and IRAC can put certain conditions on it about land, if it's more than 5 acres, more than 165 feet of shore frontage, is that years ago people used to say, I'm going to move to Prince Edward Island. So give the approval, no conditions. But now quite often what's happening is, you're going to move here within 2 years? They make that a condition of, in fact, moving here. But to get back to your question, no, there's nothing under the present situation. Okay. Blois.
Just in relation to what you're just talking to there now, I'm not sure I've given it a little more thought that I should even suggest this.
Would you like to come up here?
Not really. I guess first I should say thanks for maybe offering an employment opportunity for Rodney after he retires as an environmental officer. That may make it easier for Craig and I.
I guess I'll simply say, someone will put his name on a list.
I was just thinking when you were having that discussion about these blocks of land that people may own, and suggesting maybe that if you're not directly involved in agriculture, perhaps you shouldn't be able to own land, or if indeed how much you should own. And I'm not sure it's safe to suggest it, but the thought that's flipping through my mind is if you lived in a city or in a municipality, land is zoned or controlled by, you can do this here, you can do that there. If the public through government has determined that there should be an agricultural industry in PEI, and I'm not sure sometimes that they are, maybe land that's suitable for agriculture should be designated for that purpose. And then you will run it, excuse me, you'll run into the argument that, okay, it's worth more for selling it for cottage lots. So then the public has to come in and probably have some sort of a fund there that will balance out the ability of the person that owns the land to generate the most income from it when he sells it. Because I think you'll get into quite a hassle if you say that I can own land because I'm a farmer, you can't own land because you're a lawyer. I think you'd be in court till hell froze over.
Just raising questions. Okay.
Yeah, but you might have a vested interest in being in court till hell froze over.
The first obligation of the lawyers is to keep their clients out of court, and that's where I think most people should be.
But I guess what I really wanted to say when I was thinking about the meeting tonight, it would seem to me that the reason why we're having this discussion is to address the problem of profitability in agriculture. And I read an article in the National Post probably the last week of January. I think it was a report from the Manning Institute, and it dealt with patience or lack thereof amongst the general population, but particularly amongst policymakers, because they're always out there looking for the quick fix. I have a problem, I'm not making a profit, how can I change it, what can I do quickly? Farm organization will talk to government and say, we need to do something here, we're not making a profit, we need to grow more stuff, we need to have bigger tractors, we need to do this, we need to do that. I don't know if we can ever get to the point in PEI where we can compete with 600 hundredweight of potatoes from Idaho or a big grain crop in Western Canada. We may have to realize that we have certain advantages here, and we'll have to gear our efforts towards filling some maybe different kind of market. So I guess my thought would be that at some point in time in this discussion that we sit back, take a few minutes, and look at, is this going to fix anything if we change the limit? Is it going to make any better? Or is it just going to do the same thing as 10 years ago, you got a little bigger, 5 years ago, you got a little bigger, 5 years down the road, we'll get a little bigger, 5 more years down the road, we're going to have to get a little bigger again. Maybe it's my age, or maybe it's that I'm getting a little bit lazy, but I really don't enjoy running faster to stay in the same place. So I guess that's basically what I want to say.
Thank you, Blois. It's part of the reason I was asking some of the questions before. I want people to come forth with some statistics and more amplification on this whole thing of what's the justification being bigger or getting smaller. Reg, I am going to go back to you. New topic, if we could, from where we've been, if that's all right, please.
Yes, I'd just like to comment. I quite agree with Blois. I think he brought up a very important issue that I was going to bring up also. It's that it's the way the system is there now is part of our biggest problem, because farmers are just not getting paid for the work they've been doing over the years, and it's kind of a double whammy there. And as Rodney brought up the issue in terms of intergenerational transfer, I think that's where the public should come in, I think, and realize the situation farmers have been in. They haven't been getting paid for what they've been doing, have been got in that cost price squeeze with the way the multinationals really control the marketplace, and don't have retirement funds, and a lot of their equity is left in their land, and they're forced to try to sell that or try to intergenerational change in order to get some retirement income. So I think the public has a responsibility to go in there and to provide a pension plan for farmers that are retiring and others to take that pressure off there. And the issue that Blois brought up is very important, that we just can't continue to be, we're putting that pressure, and mostly that's from the companies who control it and otherwise, is that we just can't continue being forced to get bigger. That's the way the system is set up, that we're forcing that. And that's why the pressure is on the land limits now. And I don't think we can compete with that in terms of doing it in the type of land situation that we have here. I think the system has gone to the point where I think there should be some questioning on it. And there is some writing on the wall, I think, that we should look at, and I would advise you, if you want to do it, to do some of that. It's because even now at the GMOs situation here, right now in U.S., they spent about $45 million in the last election fighting, the big companies did, fighting the issue in California state not to have GMOs labeled. An awful lot of people want to have their food labeled, know where it's coming from, what's involved in it. So now I gather there's even a break. I've seen in a release the other day where Walmart is now no longer going to support Monsanto and many of the others in terms of GMOs. They're getting tired of spending all this money in terms of trying to block it, and they know they're not going to be able to block it. So in a very short time, I think we're going to have legislation saying that GMOs are going to have to be labeled. We're going to have to do it. And I think that is going to put a certain amount of brakes on the corporate food system that is there now. Because really the corporate food system, I think, is only producing about 30% of the food in the world. The rest of it is produced by smaller farmers. It's just because in North America here, we think they're so big that that's what the world is like. Europe, you can't ship GMOs in there. In Japan, you can't ship them in there. There's over 60 countries in the world that will not allow GMOs to be involved in there. So I think our agriculture is down the road is going to see that in terms of breaks, in terms of expansion. So I think that will give us an opportunity not to increase the land limits, but keep them where they're at and look for a space, as Blois mentioned. We'll look at some other types of farming, something that's more comparable, I think, in keeping our land in a highly productive state and to keep it in a type of land that it would normally needs. I think monoculture is not good for the land in the long term. The writings on the wall is that the land cannot stand those yields, increased yields. They put more chemicals, more fertilizers, but the yields are not coming there and the quality is not there either. So in the long term, there are those breaks, I think, on the industrial system, and we have to look for an alternatives for it. And I think the more we do that, I think the better it is. And just another quick point, I think you should probably investigate some of the contracts or have a look at them between some of the processors like Cavendish Farms and the others in terms of farmers. There's a lot of pressure in terms of how those contracts are administered and what's happening within that it's a lot of control is left in the hands of the multinationals, I think, and it's fairly difficult on the farms and the situations there. And a lot of people are not free to speak up about them. So I think it'd be good to investigate just how some of that pressure is exerted there and what's happening there. Example of that is when you increased the land limits here about 2 years ago, when the non-agricultural land was taken out of the 1,000 and 3,000 acre limits. Just look and see what happened there in terms of what happened with the land at that time, because it increased about 30 to 40% in the amount of acreage there. What happened was Cavendish dropped a lot of smaller growers, which I think were probably the best growers in terms of how they're looking after their land because they're a more diversified operation. They took that extra acres and give it to the larger growers, and they publicly stated that that's because they want to deal with fewer and fewer farmers. They want larger ones there. And so I think if we increase the limits again, that's just going to happen again. And I think that's just a couple of issues I would hopefully that your commission would look at in terms of that. So, and from that, I think we can build up. The PEI we can't compete, as Blois said, with the operations way large in some other places. We have to look at a different way of doing things here. And it's a very small island. We only have a certain number of acreage. And to be able to keep that here and to keep that within kind of a democratic control means keeping the acreage so small, I think, for farm-wise, and giving the opportunity for smaller farmers here to be able to look at an alternative marketing system and to be able to make that arrangements with consumers, which I think is where the value added is. Because at presently, I mean, if you increase the price a small bit in the grocery stores, it wouldn't take very much to give the farmers a decent income from that. And that's why I think where Walmart now is saying on the fact that they're one of the biggest in the States, they're just going to let Monsanto go because they can't afford to do it. To them, it wouldn't make much difference if the farmers got another 20%. It wouldn't make that much difference in the end price but that would make a big difference to how communities will be set up. And when we talk 3,000 acres, we're talking whole communities, you know. That's not small potatoes in terms of a community like here in PEI. So those are just some of the points. I don't want to belabor many more, Horace.
Thank you very much. I appreciate your comments. I'm not out there seeking for expanded terms of reference too much, but Blair.
Reg is speaking of Cavendish Farms contracts there, just way up to lunch on that. They rank all the growers every year, and you can go and check the rankings and see how many people that are in the, anyways up the list at all, they're still there.
All right. Before I come to you, Terence, there's some other people who I'm sure you're thinking and have thoughts in your mind, and you haven't perhaps voiced them. If you wish to do so, I'm more than pleased to hear from you. I'm not rushing out of here, and I'll be lingering around when our formal meeting is over to meet and chat with as many of you as possible. But are there comments that you would like to make at this time?
Anybody that's here tonight, whether they speak or not, can write you a submission on their thoughts.
Absolutely.
Right. So you have email, cards, or send that to anybody that's here that they don't, they want to publicly talk about it. They can send you written submission of their thoughts.
There are lots of cards.
Right.
Lots of cards, and you can get more. Email, mail, whatever.
Well, I'm not shocked. How's that? You know that.
You're not shocked. What?
No, I said I'm not shocked. I said I'm not shy.
Oh, yeah. Well, no. Ruben, I've known you for a long time. We don't. You make your submission known in writing again, because I want to move on a little bit of it.
And I'll make them very quick.
Okay.
If you don't mind. The diminished use of land, I'm going to go right back to that very quick. We're talking about land holdings, right? Diminished use of land. And major tracts of land, and it goes back to the it'll portray back to the land holdings. And conservation, which is government, I'm talking about fish and wildlife, forestry, what do you call it? And if you can find in all your work that they have management plans, which they're putting on top of the farmers for land use, protection laws, stay back from the waterways, all that kind of stuff there. If you can find anything on a report from any one of those areas, forestry, conservation, wildlife, that they have done their job and they have kept to their setbacks and they have worked the land that they were given. And I'm talking conservation, wildlife, the whole 9 yards, that they have maintained the land they're telling the general public to do on their own. And I'd like to see the stats on that. They commissioned that. They were given over and above the commission of 3,000 acres, like a farmer idea, like there was one section there. They never did their job.
Okay, let's do this. You've spoken on several occasions, and you told me earlier you're going to... well, I think you indicated you agreed with my request to submit something in writing, and so I think I'm going to hold you to that, if that's okay. And I know, Terence, you've spoken a number of times. This is the last swing through here before I give you the opportunity to speak last. Anybody else? Bertha?
Yeah, I'll just say a few words.
Shirley? Can we get you to a mic?
Well, can you?
Okay.
Well, it's hard to know where to start, but you're looking for figures and stats.
Bertha
and so
Campbell,
on.
the president or retiring president of the Federation of Agriculture.
Yeah, thank you. When we look, for example, in the dairy industry, back in 1980 or going back to the beginning of when the Act came in, we had about 1,000 dairy farmers. Today, we have less than 200. We still produce the same amount of milk. I guess what I'm trying to, I guess, convey is, it's inevitable that consolidation has happened in farms. And just last week, or this week it might have been, I attended a meeting where ADL, which was already an amalgamation of all our old dairies, happened in the 50s. They are now joining forces with Dairytown in Sussex. So, as the gentleman that represented Cranberries, was it Cranberries last night? Yeah, very eloquently said, we can sit on our chair and refuse to acknowledge progress and fight it all the way, but I think it is all in the way we adapt to it. He spoke very well about that, and I do think that we have to, look at some of that consolidation that's happened. I'm speaking a bit about the dairy industry, but I can also talk about potatoes. Back in the early 80s, I think 88 acres was the average acreage of a potato farmer. And now if you consider it to be, 350, how does a potato farmer who needs to get to a 4-year crop rotation, and Grant has talked about a lot of the diversity that we're trying to encourage with, with soybeans and with berries and so on. How do you get to a 4-year rotation as an individual? Constrict it to 1,000 acres. You need at least 1,200. So to be, to do it for environmental reasons and to diversify, I think, which many farmers want to do, and have acknowledged the importance of it. I think we really have to look at those statistics, and it alarms me a little bit when we want to continue to hold our own. And I guess because I served on the board since 2005, I don't think I've missed too many meetings, and we've always had the position that we should only count arable acres. And we went to government many times. And I can remember actually, feeling like we were groveling almost, saying we need to get on a level playing field here because we don't want people to sacrifice their woodland and clear less than good land. And we at times, I think I would have to say, I don't like to blame government. I believe we're masters of our own destiny. But I think many times government failed to listen at certain times. I don't want to be too political, but I can remember the reception of people yawning and looking out the window as we tried to explain the changes that were happening in agriculture. And now we're at a point where we really have to do something. And I guess I would think that government, with all its authority, has a big responsibility and needs to be a little more cognizant and listening along the way. The other thing is this removal for environmentally significant land. I think that took a very, very long time to bring in. I was told 9 years. In that time period, people needed to find ways to operate within the law. And a lot of these things, I think, were slower to come in, maybe. And I think that's all we're asking for, is a little cleaner and less bureaucratic process.
Well,
so probably I've said enough.
No, I'm always pleased to hear from you and others. The matter of these exemptions, as you well know, because I raised the question of the Federation, I raised it last night, I didn't get into it so much tonight. It seems to me unfortunate that if this regulation and change was put in to enable exemptions to take place in respect to environmentally sensitive land and so forth, if such a low proportion of farmers have taken advantage of that, and last night we spent a long time talking about that, of the reasons behind it, and it just seems to me that if the exemption was put there, Bertha, for a reason and a purpose, then it has failed the reason and purpose if it hasn't been able to function properly. And that's something that I've obviously been thinking about myself for some time, and why I raise it as a question of the Federation. And I think I'll go so far as to get off tangent for a little point. My wife told me as I was leaving that she was reading something that was on one of the websites tonight, and that it indicated that the fact that I had my picture taken with Bertha Campbell and another speaker at the Federation of Agriculture in the paper that day, said it all. And I was invited to attend the meeting, and I asked to go a little bit early so I could listen to other speakers and so forth. And just to make sure, and I don't think the media are here tonight, but just to make sure, last night I was given the invitation to speak at the annual meeting of the Federation, the National Farmers Union. The date they indicated I was going to be outside the province for family reasons, and today I was in contact with them. They changed their date, and so I'm speaking to any farm organization that wishes me to speak, and this is one of the main points that I really hope will come out of this is what's there. It's supposed to function and provide certain purpose. Let's say the ways can't make that work and function the way it was intended. Terence, I'm going to give you the...
No, you don't have to. What I'm going to do is I want to talk a little more of a succession.
Please.
But what I'll do is I'll send you an email.
Please. Lots of cards. There's a card out there by the maps. Lots of cards. Take them. Look forward to hearing from you. And I think we're going to call it an evening. I'm going to stay around and talk to you individually, and thank you for coming, and I very much appreciate your interest and the efforts that you've put into this event. The success of the evening is not what I say. The success of the evening is you folks making your opinions and comments known. Thank you.